Very good morning, everyone. I'm Axel Frelkel. This is Davos Today, brought to you by the World Economic Forum and Reuters, live from this year's annual meeting. The headlines. OPEC Secretary General hints at further output cuts and calls on non-OPEC countries to cut as well. We catch up with the head of Brazil's Petrobras, one of the few oil companies boosting investments. And fly me to the moon. Can you afford to play among the stars? The future of space travel. All of that coming up this morning. We'll start with the very latest in international news from our correspondent Darcy Lampton over in London. Darcy.
Hi, Axel. Well, our top story this morning, voting has begun in Iraq's provincial elections. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is expected to cast his ballot any minute now in a poll seen as a key test of Iraq's ability to run its own affairs. The election pits Maliki against powerful Shiite rivals in the south of the country. And in the north, Arabs who boycotted the last poll are seeking to grab a share of power from Kurdish parties. Voting takes place against a backdrop of reduced violence in most parts of the country, but security is still tight, with polling stations ringed by barbed wire and steel fortifications. Polling ends this afternoon, but initial results are not expected for about 5 days. Somalia has a new president. Moderate Islamist Sheikh Sharif Ahmed, seen here in the beige jacket, won the country's top job on Saturday and vowed to end conflict in the war-torn nation. Ahmed won the election at about 4 a.m. local time after a runoff vote in an all-night parliamentary session. Commentators say his Islamist roots mean he has a real chance of reuniting Somalis after 18 years of war. Ahmed formerly headed the Sharia courts movement, which brought stability to Mogadishu and much of South Somalia for a period in 2006. Further signs of serious weakness in the US economy ensured a miserable month on Wall Street ended in a rout. US stocks posted their worst January ever, with the Dow Jones down nearly 9% in the period. The S&P 500 fell 8.6% in a month that often is a harbinger for the rest of the year's performance. The poor Friday finish followed news that the US economy shrank at its fastest pace in nearly 27 years in the fourth quarter. Gold jumped more than 2%, extending recent gains as investors sought refuge in the precious metal. The turmoil also prompted increased buying of longer-term dated US and Eurozone government bonds. To Australia now, where a heatwave is estimated to have claimed about 20 lives. In Adelaide, dozens of elderly people have been admitted to hospital with heat-related ailments. The south of the country has been baked by temperatures above 40 degrees, or about 104 Fahrenheit. The dry weather has also sparked bushfires, destroying at least 15 properties in Victoria State. Weather forecasters say there may be some respite ahead. However, temperatures are now dipping below 40 in some areas. Well, that's all the news here from London. Now back to you, Axel, in Davos.
All right, very good. Darcy Lampton, many thanks for joining us. We'll speak to you a little bit later on. Now, it seems nobody is ever happy with the price of oil. Last year, it was the devil pushing up inflation. Now the price is so low, companies are holding back investments. Since September, OPEC has agreed to cut production by 4.2 million barrels a day, about 5% of daily world demand. The cartel meets again in March to try and prop up prices. So will OPEC cut further? I put that to the organization's Secretary General, Abdullah al-Badri.
What I said, so far we have 4.2 million barrel a day cut. We have 2 million in October and September, and that was really, the compliance was 100%. Mm-hmm. And then we have another cut in Algeria, 2.2. We're still waiting for that cut, but the information I have received that the compliance will be also 100%. By the end of this month, we'll take out of the market about 4.2 million barrel a day. We have to review the market. We have to see how the supply situation is, because there is a lot of oil in the stock, and so we'll see what happens. But we cannot see at this time if we're going to have cut or not.
But you are ready to do that if it's necessary.
But if the market is unbalanced, yes, we will take measures to balance the market.
How aggressively are you prepared to cut?
We will do whatever we can do to balance the market.
Realistically, how much do you think you can cut when we take into account the nations?
I really cannot put a number at this time, but we have to do the market after February 15, February 16, when we get all the data, all the information, and then at this time we'll decide what kind of cut will be. But we will cut if the market is not balanced.
Is anyone flouting compliance right now? You
No.
talk about 100% discipline here. As far as you're concerned, no one's flouting.
The overall cut is 100%. It is different from country to country, but all of them implemented the numbers that they agreed to cut.
Do you not agree, again, back to a question I just asked, that any more cuts would be extremely tough for a number of OPEC countries? We've already heard Libya's Gaddafi expressing great concern about further cuts, and indeed he spoke of compliance. Does that not worry you?
Everybody is concerned because the price is very low at this time now. If we have this price of 40 or even 50 or even above 50, then the investment will be cut. The investment will be delayed. The investment will be shelved. So we have to be very carefully to have a reasonable price where we can have reasonable income for our country. At the same time, we can invest and have more oil in the market when the economy picks up.
And that price is what? We've heard Saudi's King Abdullah say 75 is a fair price. They need apparently 50 plus to balance their budget. Venezuela's energy minister saying between 70 and 90. What's the fair price for you?
I cannot really give you a number, but what I am hearing is 75 and 180. I think a reasonable number where we have a reasonable income for our member countries, where we can invest, where we can have additional quantity.
What are you hearing from OPEC member countries about the effects this price and indeed the cuts are having on their economies? You talked about spending, but in terms of infrastructure, in terms of just how much the people on the ground are hurting in these countries as a result of this, what are you hearing?
All the countries, they have to spend money on education, they have to spend money on housing, they have to spend money on health, they have to spend money on infrastructure. So they need that money for these kind of activities. By the same time, they need money to invest in oil and gas. So it is very important that they receive enough income they can do all these activities.
This is why I ask whether you think further cuts are really realistic for a lot of these countries.
Yes, it is realistic because we cannot really sell oil with this kind of price. It is not. The price is not reasonable, and so we have to balance the market.
Let's speak a little bit more specifically about the price. Do you think other non-OPEC producing countries need to join in to budge this price once and for all?
Yes, I visited Russia. I talked to the president. I talked to the vice prime minister, and I have asked them that the burden is too much. You must come and join us. Not only Russia, Norway, and Mexico too.
And what are you hearing from Norway and Mexico?
I have not heard anything, but I hope that they will join us.
What time frame do you think realistically we're talking about here?
I think if this 4.2 will not balance the market, then I think I urge them to join us in balancing the market.
Just the final question, Mr. Al-Badri, and I want to focus on green energy here. Is Obama ultimately bad news for conventional fuel?
No, it's not. We really encourage any other source of energy, but not to the point where if the price is too low, then let us increase the taxes on oil and use that money for renewable energy, which really is not wise. It is unfair. They do their activities, but not to the point where they discriminate against oil.
So there is no irritation in OPEC member countries about the focus, the particular focus Barack Obama has on green?
Let me tell you, the fossil fuel will be the leading energy for the foreseeable future. It is 85%, and it will last 85%, and the oil will be 40%, and will stay 40%. That other source of energy, yes, it will contribute, but it will be very low.
So that's the take from OPEC. Now let's turn to the corporate side. Many companies put spending on ice as oil prices fell. Not so Petrobras. The Brazilian group has announced a 55% increase in investment. Most will be spent in Brazil, where new oil and gas fields are being found. With me is Petrobras Chief Executive Jose Sergio Gabrielli. Many thanks for coming in so early on a Saturday morning. You heard what Mr. El-Badri had to say there. He's spoken to Norway, he's spoken to Mexico, he's spoken to Russia. I don't believe he's spoken to Brazil. Can Brazil be expected to join in these cuts?
Well, we are a very small exporter right now. Last year we exported 670,000 barrels a day, and we import 570, which means that we are pretty much balanced between imports and exports. Our production today is 2.4 million barrels a day, but we use 2 million barrels of these in Brazil to refine in Brazil to sell to the Brazilian market, which means that we have no contribution for sure on that. I agree with Mr. El-Badri about the future of oil, however, which is that even though we have several different sources of energy, oil and gas is going to play an important role in the foreseeable future. And as such, we are preparing ourselves in the future, 5 to 10 years from now, to be a big producer.
Where do you see the price? Let's just get that out of the way. I mean, I've seen interviews with you where you've mentioned $37 or $35 in 2009. How low could it get before we start going up again?
We are not saying that the price is going to be 37 in 2009, but we are taking our financial calculations considering this condition, which means that we are fully financed today if the price goes as low as $37 per barrel of Brent price, which today is 47, I think, and the future market shows 50 or 60 by the end of the year.
Given the commitment that you've shown, this investment plan, 174 billion, I would assume from that that this means you do expect a significant increase in the price and the oil price going forward to make this commercially viable.
Not really, because we have very low cost in our production. We have very large volumes that we found, and we are taking our calculations in the long run at $45 per barrel.
45, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the investment plan. Much of Brazil's energy sector says the five-year plan is unrealistic, a work of fiction. Some analysts say the plan reflects the needs of the government more than the market. Others say. What do you say to those critics?
I think those analysts are political analysts, not technical analysts, because if you go to the technical analysts, you can see that there are more questions about the possibilities. And we are saying that we have already started production from the pre-salt area. We have a standard well test in the first quarter of 2009. We are going to have a pilot project that's going to start production by 2010. We have ordered today 8 new FPSOs. We have $29 billion allocated to the pre-salt area right now, which means that we believe that we have a reasonable and sound, feasible economic program.
Well, okay, let's talk about the analyst criticisms then. You're going to bankroll, I believe, 120 billion of the 174. Am I correct in saying that?
No. We are generating from our cash flow from operation around $110 billion.
Where's the rest going to come from? I know the National Development Bank has helped for 2009, but looking ahead 5 years, can the bank help?
We have a commitment, a firm commitment of the National Bank of Development for 2009 of $12.5 billion. We have a possibility of a $10 billion additional into 2010. We have right now $5 billion from a set of banks. And we have in our cash balance, the remaining for 2009, and we think that we can raise in 2009 and 10. If the price is 37 and 40, we can raise $8 billion per year, which is very traditional, our track record.
Just to finish up on this subject, E&P is going to get a fair chunk of this, and that, according to the analysts, makes a lot of sense. I think they're a little bit more perplexed about the planned spending in downstream.
Yes.
Saying that this is politically driven.
No, it's not politically driven. The main reason why we are doing that is that we are going to increase our production from 2.4 million barrels a day to 5.7 million barrels a day by 2020. And we have right now around 2 million barrels a day of refining capacity in Brazil, and we want to add 1 million barrels a day of additional capacity for refining. And those new greenfield refineries would be optimized to produce diesel towards the European and the U.S. market.
In terms
we want to be not a crude oil exporter. We want to be a product exporter.
Want to come back to the output estimates. 2.2 million barrels a day, is that
Today is 2.4.
2.4. Some are saying because of the delays connecting the wells to the platforms, that's a little optimistic.
No, because we have already, for 2008, we had a delay of our platforms, but for the increasing production of 2009, we rely only on the current established and in operation facilities that we have.
So these delays between the wells and the platforms are not a concern to you?
Not for 2009.
Okay. Prioritization of projects. Will we see investments shifted as a result of the current conditions? Obviously the subsalt projects are important to you. Which projects may suffer as a result of you having to prioritize?
For sure, we are going to try to anticipate as much as possible the projects that can generate cash flow, free cash flow, earlier than the others. For sure, we need to have a strength in our cash flow generation. We think that we can, for example, anticipate some of the production in the north area of the pre-salt basin, because we have already the production capacity installed there, because we are producing from the reservoirs that are above the salt. But we found new reservoirs below the salt, and which means that it's going to be easier to start production in these areas.
Quick word on biofuels, what the future for Petrobras is in biofuels?
Yes, we are investing $2.8 billion in the next 5 years to develop our ethanol and biodiesel capacity.
Just to finish up with, I heard yesterday the session that you took part in, the Brazilian session hosted by Davos Schlesinger, was extremely upbeat. A lot of optimism from the Brazilian side. That's the way you feel right now going forward?
Yes, the Brazilian economy, I think, is in much better position than other economies right now. For sure, we are going to suffer some impact from the international crisis, but we think that we can respond in much better way than other economies. But I think that it's not only in the Brazilian case that we found optimism.
You're one of the few optimists here in Davos. This year.
In the energy summit that I participate to, the oil companies are very optimistic in the long run. We have a problem in the next 2 to 3 years, but everybody agrees that oil is going to come up again as a good commodity. You have a natural decline in our oil production, and it's necessary to have an investment. Everybody is saying that it's going to keep or increase investment.
Mr. Gabrielli, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Jose Gabrielli from Petrobras. Now, in a financial crisis, unnecessary costs are the first thing to go. Some top executives have been forced to give up their private jets, but it doesn't stop there. Now, even corporate social responsibility finds itself in the firing line. Reuters' Kate Jackson reports.
Delegates at the annual meeting here in Davos have been exploring the moral and ethical causes of the financial crisis. And, as ever, looking for solutions. Charitable giving doesn't appear to be one of them. While regular private donors are remaining loyal, corporates are closing their checkbooks.
People who give us big donations, the major donors, the high net worth individuals, the companies, and those, of course, are thinking much harder about what they are really going to be able to afford and how they want to spend their money.
The social contract seems far from everyone's mind. But is it really? The UN Global Compact is an international framework of participants, both corporate and civil, who sign up to protect human rights, workplace conditions and the environment.
The discussions we had here, and we continue to have, that actually these discussions are getting much more serious now. They reach boardrooms. In the past, much was on the communications level, implementation level, but now it really cuts to the core of long-term values, sustainability, and how to restore trust and confidence. So these are very fundamental issues. As a matter of fact, the crisis makes corporate responsibility much, much stronger.
More and more companies are embracing CSR as an important part of their profit-generating activities and long-term business planning. Nokia is a case in point.
Social responsibility programs are not face washing, but they are really part of creating good business environment on the longer term. And simultaneously, we are able to do good and to improve living opportunities in those countries suffering from the crisis.
So perhaps companies prioritising their CSR commitments is a silver lining to the cloud of the financial crisis. Perhaps steps are being taken towards creating a more responsible world. This is Kate Jackson in Davos for Reuters.
Among the many casualties of the financial crisis is aid. Developing countries have accused rich nations of falling behind on payments. Add to that the rise of protectionism and the lack of a global trade deal. With me to discuss the impact on Africa is Donald Kaberuka, head of the African Development Bank. Dr. Kaberuka, many thanks for coming in to see us this morning. You've warned on a number of occasions of protectionism. How much worse is it than you thought leaving Davos?
Listen, fresh evidence is mounting that the situation could be worse than we thought. We are not certain if the stimulus packages will work. It is clear that many more banks need additional capital. And so far what I've seen is that the solutions have tended to be very much national, the old-fashioned way, looking after your own. And the issues which matter for the poor countries, like trade liberalization, like keeping commitments on ODA, are falling behind off the radar.
Have you heard anything here in Davos specifically from any of the donor countries that as a result of what's going on in the financial world, they will have to pull back? Have you heard specifically from countries?
No. I think the statements made by the leaders are still in the expectations that countries, in spite of the difficulties they are facing, will try their best to keep their commitments. But I want to remind you that since 2005, the core aid to developing countries has declined by 5%. We are still a long way from the Doha Agreement. There are issues of climate change. And therefore, on one side you have got the will, which is there, but the will is not quickly being translated in deliverables for the developing countries.
G20, of course, is something central to where you want to push this discussion. The G20, of course, is coming up in April. Is there a sense here that decisions are being postponed to G20?
First of all, I think the G20 is a much more legitimate structure than the G7 or G8, which, frankly, I think is now a political dinosaur. But I would like the G20 where the African voice is also being listened to. Now, I think the work going on inside the G20, in the consultation, the process, is something to be encouraged. And as Gordon Brown said, I hope and expect that the summit in April will enable us to make progress forward. But of course, it will be the beginning of a very long process.
Which of the G7 need to do more?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
You're not pointing your finger at any one or two in particular.
We have a group of countries who have attained for a long time the 0.7 targets in terms of aid. Many small northern European countries, Netherlands and Scandinavian countries. But of late, the UK has done quite well. But I think it is important that in this crisis, people go beyond the narrow financial crisis to look at the broader issues of development, of climate change. Because I think this crisis has demonstrated that globalization has got its downside, and it is the poor people who are likely to pay most.
You have said that 4% is where GDP growth will slow in 2009. There is this number that anything below 3% would imply economies are growing below the demographic increase. That's, if you like, the danger point. What is the risk that will go below 3% either this year or next?
The risk is real. The risk is real because 2 years ago we had 7%. And that is the minimum we need for the Millennium Development Goals. Now this crisis has shaved off 3 points of GDP. And that, by the way, is an average. An average of countries which produce and export oil and smaller countries which are growing even already below 3%. It's an average. And therefore, at 4%, I'm quite concerned and I'm quite worried. And that is why I think it is important to do things which matter to stimulate the world economy and to carry along developing countries with it.
Are you optimistic about anything leaving Davos? Anything in relation to aid and where we're going in the context of this crisis?
I think what will be most important is that in the process of searching for solutions, which no one has a silver bullet, all of us should be on the same table, looking for solutions together, broadly beyond the narrow recapitalization of banks. We need to get credit moving, but also we need to get development finance moving alongside trade finance, alongside issues which matter for poor countries. Am I encouraged or discouraged? That's not the issue. I think the issue is that there is business for all of us to do, rich countries, emerging countries, poor countries, and we should get down to the business.
But how long can we continue saying that until we see concrete results?
I think it's important to begin. It's important to begin. This crisis is deep. No one knows for certain today how long or how deep it will be. And I think what is important is to have everyone together looking for solutions. This is why we're advocating the presence of emerging countries, developing countries in the G20 process.
Dr. Kabaruka, many thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, Switzerland is known for its neutrality, so when rebel leaders take over a corner of Davos, it comes as a bit of a shock. Reuters' Emma Pierce finds out what it's like to be a refugee.
A familiar Davos sight from the outside as CEOs arrive for yet another session.
Welcome to my country, move!
But it's quite a different story inside as the business leaders enter a world of rebel attacks and minefields to experience life in a refugee camp. Simulated, of course, but no less powerful for that.
One of them said there's been 3 big days in my life. The day I got married, the day I had my first child, and the day I did this, because it's impacted me so deeply.
The not-for-profit Crossroads Foundation regularly runs its refugee-run simulation for corporate clients in Hong Kong and now in Davos.
I think it's very important to make public opinions understand that it would be totally immoral to spend hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars and other currencies to support the financial sector, and not to have the same determination, I wouldn't say the same amounts, but the same determination in rescuing lives.
The UNHCR says the meeting provides the perfect opportunity to seek corporate assistance for the world's 32.9 million displaced people. Dozens of delegates have experienced Crossroads simulation in Davos this week. Director Sally Begbie believes the simulation's power comes from the input of the real refugees who participate.
Please fill your form, give for me. Good. Please come fill your form, give your form me, honey.
Sometimes people ask the refugees who work in this why it is that they do it, and their answer is they love to do it because they don't truly believe that the world understands the plight of refugees well, and they say if we can bring before people what we have to live with, then there's a chance for people to engage and to understand us at a deeper level.
If so, then the simulation has achieved its aim. Emma Pierce in Davos for Reuters.
Right, it's the weekend. Let's take a look at the weather coming up in Davos this morning with the all-important ski conditions. Daniel Aman is the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School here in Davos and joins us now. Daniel, it looks like it's another great day behind you. It's the weekend. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be heading out to the slopes.
Yeah, good morning, Alex. We will have another very pleasant day with fair and bright weather, almost no wind and temperatures increasing up to 1 degree at noon. So it's going to be spectacular.
So great skiing conditions, I guess, right?
It will be very great skiing conditions because we have a lot of snow, we have great views, and the slopes will be groomed spectacular.
Yesterday you were talking about quite an unknown run here in Davos. Anything different today?
Today it would be different. Actually, I will go to the center run. That's Parsen. It goes up to 2,800 meters, and it's famous for its wide and groomed slopes. You can run all the way down to Cloisters from a high alpine terrain down to the tree line into the village.
Daniel, I'm a beginner. I'm a novice. I want to go out today once we get off air. Where do you suggest I go?
If you're a complete novice, then I would remain down at the bottom. So I will go to Bunda or
you'd remain in the town, having a drink, right?
No, not in town, but I would just not go up because... Or if you go up, not with skis, because it's still dangerous a little bit to ski if you're not capable, or even better, take a ski instructor.
All right, Daniel, thanks for joining us. We'll see you a little bit later on in the show. Daniel Aman. The time right now is 7:30. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Axel Throttle. We start this half hour with the very latest in international news. Our correspondent Darcy Lampton in London has all the details for us. Darcy.
Hi there, Axel. Well, our top story this morning, voting has begun in Iraq's provincial elections. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has just cast his ballot in a poll seen as a key test of Iraq's ability to run its own affairs. The election pits Maliki against powerful Shiite rivals in the south of the country. And in the north, Arabs who boycotted the last poll are seeking to grab a share of power from Kurdish parties. Voting takes place against a backdrop of reduced violence in most parts of the country. But security is still tight, with polling stations ringed by barbed wire and steel fortifications. Polling ends this afternoon, but initial results are not expected for about 5 days. Somalia has a new president. Moderate Islamist Sheikh Sharif Ahmed, seen here in the beige jacket, won the country's top job on Saturday and vowed to end conflict in the war-torn nation. Ahmed won the election at about 4 a.m. local time after a runoff vote and an all-night parliamentary session. Commentators say his Islamist roots mean he has a real chance of reuniting Somalis after 18 years of war. Ahmed formerly headed the Sharia courts movement, which brought stability to Mogadishu and much of South Somalia for a period in 2006. Further signs of serious weakness in the US economy ensured a miserable month on Wall Street ended in a rout. US stocks posted their worst January ever, with the Dow Jones down nearly 9% in the period. The S&P 500 fell 8.6% in a month that often is a harbinger for the rest of the year's performance. The poor Friday finish followed news that the US economy shrank at its fastest pace in nearly 27 years in the fourth quarter. Gold jumped more than 2%, extending recent gains as investors sought refuge in the precious metal. The turmoil also prompted increased buying of longer-term dated US and Eurozone government bonds. And finally to Australia now, where a heatwave has claimed an estimated 20 lives in the south of the country. Temperatures have been hovering above 40 degrees or about 104 Fahrenheit. The dry weather has also helped fan bushfires, destroying at least 15 properties and about 6,000 hectares of land in Victoria State. Police say some of the fires may have been started deliberately. In Adelaide, dozens of elderly people have been admitted to hospital with heat-related ailments. But weather forecasters say there may be some respite ahead. Temperatures are now dipping below 40 in some areas. Well, that's all from London for now. Now back to you, back to you, Axel, in Davos.
I know it's early there, Darcy. Thanks a lot. Darcy Lambton in London. Now, aside from the financial crisis, issues of poverty development and conflict resolution remain high on the agenda at this year's annual meeting. Top of the list, of course, the intractable struggle between Israel and the Palestinians. With me now is the former international mediator Carl Bildt, now the Swedish Foreign Minister. Mr. Bildt, many thanks for coming in to join us this morning. Let's start with that subject, the Middle East. There's clearly a lot going on out of Davos. Are you optimistic that Senator George Mitchell can make a difference?
I'm optimistic in the sense that the appointment of George Mitchell is a sign of the determination of the Obama administration to really get engaged early in a serious way in the Middle East peace negotiations. Then the situation on the ground is a very difficult one. The Gaza war has created new tensions and there are new challenges that needs to be addressed. And add to that we got an Israeli election coming up on February the 10th. We don't know really what kind of government we're going to have in Israel. So it is... It's not an easy situation.
What role are the Europeans seriously considering playing on the Gaza border? There's been a lot of talk. Yeah. I know Solana was in Cairo recently. What role do you think the Europeans will really play there?
Well, there is an old agreement from 2005 on movements and access, as it's called, where they are supposed to be, and they have been also for a period of time, European observers and monitors at the border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, the Rafah crossing. They haven't been there for the last few years. But we are clearly prepared to send them back there, and we are prepared to go in, if called for by the parties, to monitor or to help or to do whatever at the other crossings, because keeping Gaza open, access to Gaza open, I think is absolutely fundamental for having not only a ceasefire that lasts for a short period of time, but more durable.
You think the Europeans will be in there soon?
Well, we are there to a certain extent. I mean, the observers are on the ground, although not at the border crossing. But they can be at the border crossing if there was an agreement within hours.
Another area, of course, is Iran. Do you think Obama is ready to change the policies as Iran is calling for? Your opposite in Iran is saying, look, we'll cooperate if that happens. Do you see any progress here?
Well, I don't see any progress so far, but I think it's too early. This is one of the more difficult areas for Washington to really sort of decide on its policy, and I don't expect them to have a policy ready by now. I think the Iranians are very clearly just waiting for the Americans to make the first move. I think it would be wise of the Iranians to make some sort of first move. They are both maneuvering in the direction of testing each other to see if there's the possibility of some sort of accommodation.
I'd be interested to get your feelings on Obama's first few weeks in the presidency. He's clearly keen to encourage the perception that he favors diplomacy over military power. Do you believe that's the way he is intending to go? Yeah, but it doesn't exclude military power. I mean, look at what's happening in Afghanistan. They're surging in whatever is 4 or 5 brigades. 20,000 more soldiers into Afghanistan. So he's showing his determination also on the military side in Afghanistan at the same time. But he wants first to be seen as a diplomat, though. Yeah. But you have to do both. He's appointing a high-level envoy, Richard Holbrooke, to do both Afghanistan and Pakistan. He is linking the two situations to each other. So I think it is diplomacy first, but it's clearly diplomacy backed up by strength. Guantanamo. Sweden has been lukewarm about the idea of taking in prisoners. What's the latest feeling now in Sweden? Well, I wouldn't say lukewarm, but I mean you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. Now Obama had taken the decision to close it down within 1 year. We don't know the details. We don't know exactly how that will occur. So from the European side, we say excellent, should have been done earlier. If there's any way in which we can help, we'll have a look at it, but we need to look at the details. And how will you help? Well, I mean, the thing that has been discussed is whether we can, individual countries in accordance with our law, can take some of these people who cannot stand trial in the US for some reason and who cannot be sent back to their countries of origin. And there are some such. Will we see some of those prisoners in Sweden? I don't know. It depends on the individual cases. I mean, we have laws that regulate these things. I know we're jumping around a lot, but of course a lot of topics to get through. Yes, that's Davos, and we want to take advantage of you being here, of course, as well. The start of the World Economic Forum conference here in Davos, Putin and Wen Jiabao spoke. They both took quite a swipe at the US over this financial crisis. Was that fair? Well, it was fair in the sense that it all started in the US. But where it all ends up, I think that's too early to say. It might well be that at the end of the day, the US system comes out of this marginally better than the other systems, but that's too early to tell. But to open something like Davos by firing a shot like that at the US, in diplomatic terms, what do you feel about that? This is Vladimir Putin. That's his style. I mean, that's been the line coming out of him for quite some time now, that Russia is big, Russia is strong, America is weak. Let's see. I'm not quite certain that that is the true story. I want to finish up generally with your feelings on Davos. Financial stability, that story has clearly been the big one coming in. Global security, the political situation in the Middle East, what we saw with the Turkish Prime Minister and Shimon Peres in one of those debates, has that overtaken this financial story here in Davos? When you leave, what is foremost in your mind? Well, I don't think it has overtaken the story. The story is clearly that this has been the valley of tears and the deep uncertainty over where the global economy is heading. But also at the same time the geopolitical challenges that we face. And over time the interaction between the two. Because the financial crisis, the economic crisis, will be quite a difficulty for weak economies, for fragile states, and that in its turn will make it more difficult to handle the different geopolitical challenges that we have. Carl Bildt, many thanks for coming in this morning. Thank you. Global warming and environmental risks are high on the World Economic Forum agenda for 2009. So too is the problem of how to rebuild the battered global economy, as we've just been discussing. But can the two problems be tackled together to find a profitable and sustainable model? Nick Edwards reports.
The World Economic Forum has declared 2009 to be the year in which its members, drawn from the world's most powerful companies, must manage risk in a brand new way. Founder Klaus Schwab wrote in the forum's annual review of global risks that business must look well beyond the here and now with the financial crisis and global recession. Members meeting high in the Swiss Alps must also focus on longer-term issues of climate change and resource-related risks, and their window of opportunity for success is narrow. But Jonathan Lash, Executive Director of think tank World Resources International, says restarting global growth provides a perfect opportunity to put the environment at the heart of a new economic model.
A recovery involves investment in new products and new processes, new jobs, and that investment ought to be an investment in the markets of tomorrow. So we need to send a signal about what we're going to do about energy and climate.
That signal should have been coming loud and clear from the forum for years. Its core belief is that economic progress without social development is not sustainable, and that social development without economic progress is not feasible. It should resonate especially among members concerned about the carbon footprint they leave behind as they jet in from abroad and then use helicopters to avoid the logjam of limousines the annual meeting security cordon then creates. But Alexander Hedinger of the Green Party of Davos is not satisfied the forum is good news for the environment, either locally or globally.
Well, actually they had, I think, more than 15 years' time to convince us, and I don't think they really can convince us anymore.
Business clearly must do more, says Adam Bly, editor-in-chief of science-based Seed magazine and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. He says business and political leaders have to change the way they think and integrate scientific discipline into commerce.
And so when you start to really think about a systems approach, sort of the ecology of finance, so to speak, that's almost where we need to integrate science, I think, at a greater level now, is not just in developing new tools and sort of fancy techniques, but really how do we understand interdependence of variables, how do we think more holistically about the state of the economy.
Whatever the approach, capital is the key ingredient, and it's in very short supply right now. But Thierry Lombard, managing partner of Swiss private bankers Lombard Odier, says there is money for environmental investments.
I think the credit has disappeared a bit on these markets. The investors are still there, some with less money, unfortunately, than they had before, but still the institutional investor, the pension fund, the private investors, they are still very much interested and understand that, part of the future of the stock markets is also going to be in these investments.
And so the meetings being held here this year could prove pivotal, yes, for the world of business, but also for the world's environment. I'm Nick Edwards in Davos for Reuters.
Now, in these times of financial crisis, a not-for-profit foundation has managed to raise enough funds to keep free and open content on the internet. The Wikimedia Foundation, which runs the online encyclopedia Wikipedia, blew well past its latest budget targets, ending fundraising early. With me is Sue Gardner, Executive Director of the Wikimedia Foundation. Sue, thanks a lot for coming in this morning.
Sure.
Now, we're talking about the 08-09 budget. You blew past that. You ended fundraising early. I've got to say, at times like these, that's astonishing. How did that happen?
We were really surprised, actually. We had just moved to San Francisco from Florida, and our budget had increased fairly significantly, so we were a bit worried. And when the economy started to melt down and everyone started to get very concerned, we didn't know what our position would be. So we were as surprised as anyone. And the only thing that we can attribute it to, and it's just speculation, is that we think in difficult times people make hard choices. Our money comes from, it's an average donation of $35. And we think that mothers and grad students and kids just wanted to look hard at where they were putting their money, and they wanted to put it with Wikipedia.
So they feel good about themselves giving it to Wikipedia?
I think they just like it. They just like the encyclopedia. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of goodwill for it.
How do you're surrounded, of course, by corporates whose aim is to make big profits here. Sure. Where do you fit in? Where does Wikipedia fit into Davos?
We don't even fit in San Francisco. We're a really odd duck. We really are. We're in Soma, which is south of Market in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. And people often, first of all, nobody knows we're a nonprofit. People just don't know that. They don't know that we're a charity. They make a lot of assumptions about Wikipedia. I think they think that it is a utility. It's like Google. You turn on your computer and it's there. And if they think at all about the internet and how the companies work and that kind of thing, startups and so forth, they either think we're a little tiny startup that's going to make a lot of money, going to have an IPO, or they think we're Google and we have a campus in Silicon Valley, thousands of people, massage tables,
and it's not
personal chefs. No, we have 23. We have a staff of 23 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any talk among that staff of 23 of IPOing, of monetizing this, of getting together with broadcasters? I know there's been some talk about it, pulling in some advertising. Any talk of that?
Never. No. I mean, we would never rule out advertising. We never have, right? Because our view is if for some reason we couldn't take care of ourselves and we had no alternative and the alternative was to shut down the servers, then we'd have a conversation about that. But we don't think we're ever going to be in that position. Our goal is, it's a very earnest organization, our goal is to bring free knowledge to people all over the world. And so we want to line up with teachers and educational institutions, and they typically are pretty advertising averse, so it's simplest for us just not to go down that road.
I'm going to continue down that road just for a sec. You put stuff up, it stays up sometimes even if it's not correct. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. The advertisers, of course, would have a big problem with that. The ethics would be slightly different. Isn't that the main reason you can't go down the advertising route?
No, that has nothing to do with it. I don't think there's anything different about our ethics. I was a journalist for 17 years. I don't think that Wikipedia's journalistic standards are any lower than the news media's. In fact, when I first came to the organization, when I was first thinking about coming to the organization, it was during the Virginia Tech massacre, do you remember? And I had been off-site at a conference watching Wikipedia cover that story and watching their coverage unfold, and also watching the discussion that Wikipedians were having, which you can watch, live on the site. And I thought that their discussion, this was why I decided to go there, I thought their discussion was every bit as thoughtful and intelligent as my own newsroom was having back at the office.
But of course, what goes up on your site may be incorrect. People going on intentionally and spreading rumour, muckraking, and that's something you don't check or pull off, right?
It does. The volunteers do it. We have 100.
But they don't get everything.
No, they can't get everything, but the news media doesn't get everything either, right?
But there have been injunctions against Wikipedia because of this.
Nobody has ever successfully sued the organization. We've never had a serious problem in that regard. We've had things happen that we've been embarrassed about, but I would venture to say any journalistic organization would have had the same problems, Everybody makes mistakes. What I think is different about Wikipedia, and what I personally find very appealing, is that it's a modest organization, right? It understands its limitations. It is vulnerable to what we call vandalism, if someone sort of spoofs the site and says someone has died when they haven't or whatever. It's vulnerable to that, but we have 150,000 volunteers around the world who are working to combat that all the time with technical fixes, watching articles, all sorts of tools.
You talk about yourself as a modest organization. I guess in that vein, you stopped your fundraising.
Yeah.
Why did you stop the fundraising? Why did you stop the fundraising?
We talked about it a lot in the office because it's a very strange thing to do, right? Like, thank you, we have enough money, we're going to stop. Nobody ever does that.
How's 0910 going to look?
It's going to be a little more expensive for us. I think we're going to spend a little bit more money, but I feel comfortable with that now because now my belief is that the readers will be there for us, right? But our decision to stop it was essentially, it was pretty simple because we felt we had an implicit deal with our readers, right? And the deal was we need to make our operating budget, we need to pay the bandwidth bills, we need to buy new servers. So we'll put up, in effect, it's a small advertisement, it's a little banner at the top of the page. We'll put that up. But the minute we cross the threshold and we can, financially sustain ourselves for the year, the deal is we will take it down.
Okay, so just to finish up with, you're not worried financially right now, and we've talked that through. You're not. It doesn't seem the financial crisis itself is something that worries you particularly. What are you worried about in terms of the business?
Gosh, the thing that I worry about the most, coming from the media as a journalist, I know that an editorial initiative is only as rich and as thoughtful and as intelligent as the people who contribute to it, right? Wikipedia currently is contributed to primarily by young male geeks, right? Really, really smart, really earnest kids. I want to broaden that out a little bit. That's my goal. I don't worry about that, but I'd like to see more women contribute. I'd like to see more older people contribute. There are people who spent their entire lives developing expertise and accruing knowledge. I want them to give it back in the Wikipedia.
Very good. Best of luck to you, Sue.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming in this morning. Sue Gardner from the Wikimedia Foundation. Now, a lot of talk in Davos has circled around oil, but before the meeting, Europe was more worried about gas. A dispute between Russia and Ukraine stopped supply for days, and Europe's energy security was back in the spotlight. How does that change the continent's approach to alternative sources of energy, including nuclear? Reuters' Jane Grieve put that question to Pierre Gadon, ex-chief executive at EDF.
I think during the last 2 years, people realized that the energy sector will require huge investment to reinforce the security of supply and to reduce CO2 emission. The dispute that you mentioned is clearly strengthening the need for security of supply and diversification. When I mean diversification, it means that to produce energy, we need all means: renewable, oil, coal, hydro, and nuclear.
Have you had any contact with new markets since the Russia-Ukraine dispute?
I think we have made the choice to develop nuclear first in the countries where the need for nuclear was the most obvious and the most urgent. I mean China, France, of course, United States, Great Britain. But we have contact with several countries, and my bet is that in the coming years, several countries will be interested in developing nuclear in Central Europe, for example, but not only, probably in Africa too.
Have you seen any new upturn in investment since the Russia-Ukraine crisis?
No, but what I think has been discussed here in Davos, I think that even with the financial turmoil that we are living today, all energy companies, not all, but many energy companies are willing to keep the speed for investing.
EDF bought British Energy last September. Now you plan to build 4 nuclear reactors in Britain. Could the recession delay any of your plans?
My point is that in the energy sector, we are in an environment with very long time scale. Developing a nuclear plant takes between 5 to 8 years. The duration of the plant is 60 years. So clearly, the perspective of time for energy has nothing to do with the downturn in the economic situation.
Oil prices are low at the moment, around $40 a barrel. Is there an argument that with oil prices so low that nuclear isn't viable?
Yesterday we had a debate on what will be the oil prices. Everybody agrees with an increase of energy consumption of 50% within the 20 to 25 years. Price of oil will increase, and I'm confident that in the price which are the most likely to become the average price on the market, the nuclear is more competitive today than it was 10 years ago.
China, South Africa and Italy are all target countries for EDF. What are your acquisition plans?
I think increasingly we will like to develop partnership. In China we have a partner and we have 30% of ownership and our partner is 70%. And in many countries we are looking for partners because EDF is willing to be the leader in developing nuclear, but we are very open to share with partners in different countries.
Let's go now to Reuters' Emma Pierce, who has the details of what's coming up in Davos today.
Day 4 and the focus turns to financing and feeding the world. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown addresses the World Economic Forum at 11:15. As one of the key proponents of bank bailouts, finance will doubtless feature in the session. As world leaders search for ways out of the crisis, they turn their attention to the future of banking. How will increased government intervention play out? And what are the challenges facing different industries around the world? While finance is the pressing issue, delegates are also keeping an eye on the environment. How does the world use its water, and what are the risks of political strife if there isn't enough? The same goes for food in a world where over 860 million people are starving. Added to that, food prices are on the rise and climate change is shrinking harvests. Delegates will press for more funding in agriculture. They argue that investment in farming cuts poverty 4 times more effectively than anything else. Back to trade, and as the financial crisis bites, fears of protectionism are growing. Countries may want to protect their own economies, but would protectionism in fact hold back global growth?
Now, since September, OPEC has agreed to cut production by 4.2 million barrels a day, about 5% of daily world demand. The cartel meets again in March to try and prop up prices. So will OPEC cut further? I put that to the organization's Secretary General Abdullah El Badri.
What I said, so far we have 4.2 million barrel a day cut. We have 2 million in October and September, and that was really the compliance was 100%. And then we have another cut in Algeria, 2.2. We're still waiting for that cut, but the information I have received that the compliance will be also 100%. By the end of this month, we'll take out of the market about 4.2 million barrel a day. We have to review the market. We have to see how the supply situation is, because there is a lot of oil in the stock, and so we'll see what happens. But we cannot see at this time if we're going to have cut or not.
But you are ready to do that if it's necessary.
But if the market is unbalanced, yes, we will take measures to balance the market.
How aggressively are you prepared to cut?
We will do whatever we can do to balance the market.
Realistically, how much do you think you can cut when we take into account the nations?
I really cannot put a number at this time, but we have to do the market after February 15, February 16, when we get all the data, all the information, and then at this time we'll decide what kind of cut will be. But we will cut if the market is not balanced.
Is anyone flouting compliance right now? You talk about 100% discipline here. As far as you're concerned, no one's flouting.
The overall cut is 100%. It is different from country to country, but all of them implemented the numbers that they agreed to cut.
Do you not agree, again, back to a question I just asked, that any more cuts would be extremely tough for a number of OPEC countries? We've already heard Libya's Gaddafi expressing great concern about further cuts, and indeed he spoke of compliance. Does that not worry you?
Everybody is concerned because the price is very low at this time now. If we have this price of 40 or even 50 or even above 50, then the investment will be cut, the investment will be delayed, the investment will be shelved. So we have to be very carefully to have a reasonable price where we can have reasonable income for our country. At the same time, we can invest and have more oil in the market when the economy picks up.
And that price is what? We've heard Saudi's King Abdullah say 75 is a fair price. They need apparently 50 plus to balance their budget. Venezuela's energy minister saying between 70 and 90. What's the fair price for you?
I cannot really give you a number, but what I am hearing is 75 and 180. I think a reasonable number where we have a reasonable income for our member countries, where we can invest, where we can have additional quantity.
What are you hearing from OPEC member countries about the effects this price and indeed the cuts are having on their economies? You talked about spending, but in terms of infrastructure, in terms of just how much the people on the ground are hurting in these countries as a result of this, what are you hearing?
All the countries, they have to spend money on education, they have to spend money on housing, they have to spend money on health, they have to spend money on infrastructure. So they need that money for these kind of activities. By the same time, they need money to invest in oil and gas. So it is very important that they receive enough income they can do all these activities.
This is why I ask whether you think further cuts are really realistic for a lot of these countries.
Yes, it is realistic, because we cannot really sell oil with this kind of price.
Right, let's take a look now at the weather coming up in Davos this morning with the all-important ski conditions. Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos, joins us now. Daniel, good to see you again. It's still nice behind you. It's the weekend. What's the skiing going to be like today?
Skiing just going to be great because it is nice and it will remain like this. We have another very pleasant day, fair and bright weather, almost no wind on the mountains and temperature increasing throughout the day.
Was there some concern, given the warmth yesterday and indeed today, that some of the lower slopes will get a bit icy?
I don't think the lower slope's going to be icy, because what we have is like a weather inversion, so actually temperature below in the valley is deeper than up on the mountain, so you have to go up and it will be warmer.
So where are we going then today? Which slope should we be heading for?
You should head to Parsen, because they're perfectly white slopes, they're groomed, they're gentle, you have a spectacular view, and you can experience from an alpine terrain all the way down tree line or even ski into the valley.
Daniel, thanks a lot. Daniel Oman, we'll speak to you one more time a little bit later on. Thanks a lot for joining us. The time now is 8 o'clock. Even headhunters aren't immune from the global downturn. Last month, Hydrogen Struggles, one of two publicly traded US-based executive recruiters, announced it was cutting about 15% of its global headcount, with employers shedding staff across the board. Not surprisingly, headhunters are clearly feeling the pinch, but recruiters are also likely to be among the first to benefit from the upturn when it comes. We are going to be joined a little bit later on in the show this morning by Hydrogen Struggles Chief Executive Kevin Kelly, so do stay around for that. First, though, let's get out to London and Darcy Lampton with all the very latest international news. Darcy.
Morning, Axel. Our top story this morning. Voting has begun in Iraq's provincial elections. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki voted earlier this morning in a poll seen as a key test of Iraq's ability to run its own affairs. The election pits Maliki against powerful Shiite rivals in the south of the country, and in the north, Arabs who boycotted the last poll are seeking to grab a share of power from Kurdish parties. Voting takes place against a backdrop of reduced violence in most parts of the country, but security is still tight, with polling stations ringed by barbed wire and steel fortifications. Polling ends this afternoon, but initial results are not expected for about 5 days. Somalia has a new president. Moderate Islamist Sheikh Sharif Ahmed, seen here in the beige jacket, won the country's top job on Saturday and vowed to end conflict in the war-torn nation. Ahmed won the election at about 4 a.m. local time after a runoff vote in an all-night parliamentary session. Commentators say his Islamist roots mean he has a real chance of reuniting Somalis after 18 years of war. Ahmed formerly headed the Sharia courts movement, which brought stability to Mogadishu and much of South Somalia for a period in 2006. Further signs of serious weakness in the US economy ensured a miserable month on Wall Street ended in a rout. US stocks posted their worst January ever, with the Dow Jones down nearly 9% in the period. The S&P 500 fell 8.6% in a month that often is a harbinger for the rest of the year's performance. The poor Friday finish followed news that the US economy shrank at its fastest pace in nearly 27 years in the fourth quarter. Gold jumped more than 2%, extending recent gains as investors sought refuge in the precious metal. The turmoil also prompted increased buying of longer-term dated US and Eurozone government bonds. Finally to Australia now, where a heatwave has claimed an estimated 20 lives in the south of the country. Temperatures have been hovering above 40 degrees or about 104 Fahrenheit. The dry weather has also helped fan bushfires, destroying at least 15 properties and about 6,000 hectares of land in Victoria. State police say some of the fires may have been started deliberately. In Adelaide, dozens of elderly people have been admitted to hospital with heat-related ailments, but weather forecasters say there may be some respite ahead. Temperatures are now dipping below 40 in some areas. Well, that's all from London. Now back to you, Axel, in Davos.
All right, Darcy, thanks very much indeed. Darcy Lampton in London. So it's Saturday morning in Davos and the limousines are starting to pour out of town. The world's great and good were invited to the Alps to shape a post-crisis world. So what did they achieve? Reuters' Jane Grieve finds out.
The town of Davos, high in the Swiss mountains, has once again spent the week transformed from a skier's paradise into a serious business and economic gathering. From all accounts, and as no surprise, this year the meeting's been more subdued. The forums here have had titles like Renewing Trust in Corporations and Lessons Learned from the Global Financial Crisis. So did delegates here, braving the sub-zero temperatures, think this year's meeting delivered?
I must say that in the last couple of years I had a feeling that the forum is not very interesting, that it's repeated in the same style, in the same arguments. Now, this year I discovered that because the world has real problems, the forum is much more interesting.
You can definitely sense a different tone, obviously, because of the financial crisis and all. In spite of, I agree with Professor Schwab's approach of, trying to sees this as a time of opportunity, being a little more positive. In spite of that, I still sense a bit of a negative tone here, but it's a tough time. We haven't faced this in years.
It's one of those steps in which people gather and try to make sense of a senseless situation that's difficult for every country and every person to come to grips with it in its own terms. So that's one of the moments in which such gatherings are not just talk. It's a very serious matter.
The meeting certainly hasn't been without colour and controversy. There was only low-level representation from the new US administration. There were notable absentees from the banking sector. And Turkey's Prime Minister stormed off stage after a clash with Israeli President Shimon Peres during a panel discussion on Gaza. HSBC Chairman Stephen Green told Reuters here in Davos that the downturn is not going to be a temporary one, and what he'd like to see, at least in the banking sector, is a return to old-fashioned virtues, cost-to-income ratios and suitability of products for customers. Well, that's one opinion. Let's hear what others had to say.
Bankers have to redouble their efforts to take responsibility for their own mistakes, to accept that change needs to take place in the banking community in terms of improved risk management, but also we need to work closely with the regulators and the governments in a partnership, not in a competitive, finger-pointing fashion, to really find ways to sustain credit flows around the world, not just in each country domestically, but globally, to sustain economic growth.
Well, this is actually this is a cycle which is going to, my opinion, this is going to stay a bit longer than expected. I think it's going to stay another 2 to 3 years, and then the recovery will start from there.
As the meeting of the World Economic Forum winds down for another year, the focus moves now to the G20 summit in April, ahead of the G8 summit in July. It's all further global coordination to steer the economy back on track. This is Jane Grieve in Davos for Reuters.
Let's get the inside view. Andre Schneider is MD at the World Economic Forum and joins me in the studio right now. Andre, thanks for coming in.
Hello.
Bright and early this morning. We heard in that package, because the world has problems right now, that is what has made Davos interesting, fascinating and worthwhile this year. Would you agree with that?
I would say it's certainly much more deep, the discussions, but I think also in the previous years it was really of high interest. But it's true, today everyone came to Davos to actually have this unique platform where you can meet people from the government world, from the civil society and business, to really get a better understanding and actually try to figure out what will be the main thrusts necessary to bring us actually out of this crisis.
Do you feel disappointed that there is so much pessimism? Do you feel disappointed that so many people stayed away from the banking sector, from the US administration? Was that a problem for you?
I mean, one has to say there were incredible differences of attitude. I mean, we had really the gloom and doom side, but we also had very, very positive, I mean, not saying there's no crisis, but people saying, let's just go there and do something. Now in the finance sector, actually I have to correct you, because we never had more people from the finance sector than this year. So this was actually also their record year.
I guess what I'm talking about is chief executives of some of the big US banks specifically.
Yeah, but the finance sector is luckily not limited to American banks. They're very important. And for the US administration, I think we have to understand they are now 1 or 2 weeks into office. And actually, I thought it was a great way to start that with the presence of Valerie Jarrett, who could really come in absence of President Obama not being able to leave the country, really deliver his message and his wishes, what he would expect from Davos.
And you think that was done?
That was done, and I think it was also announced that that will be a start of a much longer collaboration, and I think that's what is going to be important, because we will still be in 1 year discussing at least on further measures to get further building up economy in a more sustainable way.
I guess, apologies for coming back to this banking issue, but I guess one of the reasons I said, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan, there was a great quote from him: "We haven't yet seen all the right people get together in the same room, close the door and come out with a solution." Davos is a great forum to do that.
I think, first of all, Davos is not the place where decisions will be taken, but it's the place where the decisions will be prepared. And we're still having today a very important sessions actually between central bankers, bankers and other representatives from governments, because I think the real challenge today is that the discussion has to be continued not just amongst the financial sector, but actually with the more state actors, because I think many of the solutions have to come out there, and there are some real serious risks that with all those stimulation packages, we're just going to prepare the next crisis.
Do you feel you have done what you set out to do this time round in Davos, and how will things change for next time round based on what you've seen this time?
I think one of the targets which we wanted to give ourselves is really to think about more how we can go forward with a more sustainable approach to maintain climate change very high on the agenda. And I have to say, President Obama with his announcement has helped there very much too. I think that we have really achieved. I think also the whole discussions around values, to go back to values which we used to have, which we seem to have forgotten sometimes, I think we have achieved a lot of things. I think the important thing will be how this will be now implemented throughout the year, because that's where then really the difference will be made. But I can see, having talked to many participants, that there is a high wish, and that's a little bit the contrary to the more negative forecast. People really want to do actions to get out of it. They all are convinced it will take some time. It's going to be a difficult journey, but they're really ready to take it up and take the right decisions.
Has there been more understanding of what happened in the financial crisis rather than shaping the post-crisis world, as the title suggests? What has been greater, would you say?
I think there was a big part, especially at the beginning, really concentrating how did we get in there, what were the different roles of the actors, and we actually also had some forecasting work done, actually, how that could evolve. But the importance here was not to just stay and look backwards and be unhappy about it. I mean, you needed the analysis, but really what was great this year was that the fact that now really everyone feels really energized to go forward and take actions to really help build the way out of this crisis.
Financial stability is something I put to a few guests this morning, but financial stability versus global security, two of the big themes this time round. Clearly the Middle East was a focus.
Yes.
As people leave, what are they talking more about?
I think probably more about the financial stability, because we all know if there will be a major breakup still happening this year, we might really not see in any soon future a coming out of the crisis. So the forecast which I heard was saying, if we can now more or less have a less bumpy road, we have a chance to start to stabilize the situation throughout the year. If there's a major institution like a bank still going down, or even a country going bankrupt, then we will really hit very difficult times. I think the discussion on the Middle East is very important, but I think given what happened this week, we were able to see that the tensions are so high, emotions are so strong, that it probably will take quite some time still to really get to a level where one can recognize, which was actually seeable here, that there are common points. But today it's too much concentration on the points which separate than on those which bring together.
Andre, many thanks for coming in this morning. Andre Schneider, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. Right, let's get now to Reuters' Emma Pierce, who has the details of what's coming up today in Davos.
Day 4, and the focus turns to financing and feeding the world. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown addresses the World Economic Forum at 11:15. As one of the key proponents of bank bailouts, finance will doubtless feature in the session. As world leaders search for ways out of the crisis, they turn their attention to the future of banking. How will increased government intervention play out? And what are the challenges facing different industries around the world? While finance is the pressing issue, delegates are also keeping an eye on the environment. How does the world use its water, and what are the risks of political strife if there isn't enough? The same goes for food in a world where over 860 million people are starving. Added to that, food prices are on the rise and climate change is shrinking harvests. Delegates will press for more funding in agriculture. They argue that investment in farming cuts poverty 4 times more effectively than anything else. Back to trade, and as the financial crisis bites, fears of protectionism are growing. Countries may want to protect their own economies, but would protectionism in fact hold back global growth?
The global downturn is being felt perhaps most immediately in corporate headcount. From factory floor to chief executive, hundreds of thousands of jobs are disappearing at an alarming rate. Highly paid senior staff are among those most at risk. With me now is Kevin Kelly, chief executive of Executive Headhunters, Heidrick & Struggles. Kevin, good to see you this morning. Thanks for coming in. Your business, 35% of your business comes from financial services or forms of financial services. Must be tough times for you right now.
They are difficult, and I think we're feeling a lot of what our clients are feeling around the globe. Whether it's letting go 15% of staff, whether it's restructuring the business, looking at real estate footprints, etc. But you're right. It's a tough time out there. It's a tough time for many individuals, but we're doing our best to help many great people around the world find a job that's going to actually help them get through this.
And of course, you laid off 12% to about 200 people with your workforce recently, right?
That's right.
At the same time, we talk about tough times. You've talked about making acquisitions. You've talked about you've highlighted the fact you're debt free. You're in a good position to make acquisitions. A lot of those target companies are a lot cheaper right now than they were. What are we going to see from Heidrick & Struggles?
Well, we're using this, having gone through the restructuring, we're using this as an opportunity to capture market share. And again, we see many of our clients doing the same thing, be it by geography. We're still growing a lot in Asia Pacific. We're growing in Central and Eastern Europe. And we're looking to capture market share in North America. And there's two ways we're going to do that. Number one, by looking at a broader suite of services around leadership advisory and looking at acquisitions in that space, as well as looking at acquisitions in the core executive search business, be it by product and by geography.
You wouldn't think about naming any names for us here today on the show?
Not at this point in time.
Okay. I imagine a lot of people, though, are knocking on your door right now, given the layoffs we've seen in financial services. But there aren't a lot of places to put them. This is the key problem, right?
Well, there are a couple of interesting things happening. Obviously, there is an oversupply right now in the marketplace, particularly in financial services. But what we're seeing is an interesting trend of some CEOs giving their equity today are not retiring, which is causing a clog in senior management. And that's one of the dilemmas we face today. Additionally, we see, quite frankly, a number of CEOs or potential CEO candidates saying, why would I take on a CEO role? It's not, I don't want to go under the scrutiny and, put myself in a position where I could be out of a job in a year.
What is the average time now for a chief executive? So 3 to 4 years, is it still about that?
That's about 18 to 20 months.
Oh, it's 18 to 20 months,
that's
okay.
What I'm saying. So
yeah.
The challenge, again, they have is why should I have the reputational risk and why should I look at taking on a role where the probability of success may be slim in this marketplace?
Isn't it true that in these times companies should be looking to protect their talent and those positions rather than let them go? Because of course, when things we all know this cycle, when things pick up, they need to hire them back.
Absolutely, and we're spending a lot of time right now focusing on retention and development and assessment of employees as well. And it's a great point because if you look at Pricewaterhouse's CEO study that just came out this week, the number one issue facing CEOs, 97% of them said, was retaining their key employees, particularly in a market like this.
Again, back to your bottom line and what you can do to keep a firm base under your revenues. You're upping leadership advisory fees, I believe, and you want that to become about 40% of your revenue.
Correct.
Isn't that very, very difficult to do in this sort of cash-strapped environment? I mean, how's that going down? When you chat with people here in Davos, what do they say about that?
Well, it's interesting because we are going to still focus on our core business, but a lot of time we've given away these services for free. A specific example is we go in and do a CEO search today. 35% of them have an internal candidate. So we base that candidate and assess them versus external candidates. The internal candidate gets the job. We then help them with an onboarding process. The internal candidate has a new strategy they want to execute. We then help them assess whether they have the right leadership team in place and actually help develop those individuals to help execute that strategy. So,
which sectors do you think will be your bread and butter going forward? Let's leave financial services aside, of course, but which sectors still look very, very good?
Well, so we're still seeing a lot of business in consumer goods in different parts of the world. We're seeing business in the biotech space, renewable, alternative and renewable energy, as well as life sciences. So there are pockets and, again, geographies. We're also seeing for the first time foreign companies, European and Asian companies, looking at this as an opportunity to enter the U.S. market. So that's helping drive our business in North America.
Just to finish up with general feeling here at Davos, have you had some fruitful meetings, I guess, putting to companies and the human resources side of these companies that you're going to up your fees in certain areas? Have they been fruitful, these meetings?
Very fruitful, and I've had the nice nice thing about the meeting this year is I think people are much more open and transparent about what they, both as individuals, are going through, and two, what they're going through as organizations. So they
want to listen more this time round. Is that right, rather than talk?
Absolutely.
Is there enough humility around?
I think there's yes, plenty of humility.
All right, Kevin, thanks a lot for coming in this morning. Kevin Kelly, Chief Executive at Heidrick & Struggles. Right, let's get back to the weather in Davos this morning. It is a Saturday morning, of course, what the ski conditions are like out there. Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos, joins us for a final time in the show this morning. How's it looking, Daniel?
So everything's looking just great, as you can see in behind. We will have another very pleasant day with fair and bright weather, almost no wind, and temperature increasing to a warm, nice skiing day.
What kind of temperature are we looking at today?
We're looking at temperature on the top around like -1, maybe even it will turn up to 1 or 2 degrees plus.
Particular runs that we should be looking at today?
I will go to Parsen because there are extremely gentle slopes, they're wide and they're perfectly groomed. You can ski from a high alpine terrain down to the tree line, maybe even down to Klosters or Davos.
I'm a novice, is that a good run for me?
If you choose the right blue run, yes, but keep away from the red and black one.
and they're easy to see, are they?
Yeah, they're easy, they're all marked, and you also are guided by our instructors, and you will find there's a great system to find a great slope.
Okay, and just finally, for those lucky enough to be staying over the whole weekend and into next week, what's the outlook?
The outlook actually is good. There will be a few clouds by tomorrow, maybe even a little more overcast on Monday, but in general it's great skiing condition, lots of snow, and we will have sun every day.
Daniel, thanks a lot for joining us. Daniel Amann from the Swiss Snow Sports School, talking about the weather and, of course, those skiing conditions. Now, Switzerland is known for its neutrality, so when rebel leaders take over a corner of Davos, it comes as a bit of a shock. Reuters' Emma Pierce finds out what it's like to be a refugee.
A familiar Davos sight from the outside as CEOs arrive for yet another session.
Welcome to my country, move!
But it's quite a different story inside as the business leaders enter a world of rebel attacks and minefields to experience life in a refugee camp. Simulated, of course, but no less powerful for that.
One of them said there's been 3 big days in my life. The day I got married, the day I had my first child, and the day I did this, because it's impacted me so deeply.
The not-for-profit Crossroads Foundation regularly runs its refugee run simulation for corporate clients in Hong Kong and now in Davos.
I think it's very important to make public opinions understand that it would be totally immoral to spend hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars and other currencies to support the financial sector, and not to have the same determination, I wouldn't say the same amounts, but the same determination in rescuing lives.
The UNHCR says the meeting provides the perfect opportunity to seek corporate assistance for the world's 32.9 million displaced people. Dozens of delegates have experienced Crossroads simulation in Davos this week. Director Sally Begbie believes the simulation's power comes from the input of the real refugees who participate.
Please fill your form, give for me. Good. Please come fill your form, give your form me, honey.
Sometimes people ask the refugees who work in this why it is that they do it, and their answer is they love to do it because they don't truly believe that the world understands the plight of refugees well, and they say if we can bring before people what we have to live with, then there's a chance for people to engage and to understand us at a deeper level.
If so, then the simulation has achieved its aim. Emma Pierce in Davos for Reuters.
Is any brand really recession-proof? Tupperware may be as close as it gets. The maker of food boxes sold at in-home parties is trimming capital spending by 2/3 this year, but no layoffs or major cost-cutting. A rising global jobless toll means Tupperware also has a bigger potential sales force. Chief Executive Rick Goings joins me now in the studio. Rick, thanks for coming in this morning.
Good to be here.
Unlikely to make any layoffs or to roll out any cost-cutting. You're one of very few chief executives saying that right now.
Well, our focus is really growth right now. We do about half our business in emerging markets of the world, China, Indonesia, India, Russia, and we've been growing about 20% in those markets. So we don't think at the same time, and the others established markets, so we're not bulletproof for what's happening out there, but if this may be bad English but good sense, we'll do less poorly than other companies. We're counting on growing.
We'll talk about your numbers in just a sec, or at least what you can say. I know you got your full year numbers out next week. This is what I don't get. Okay, the jobless toll is rising. There are a lot more potential Tupperware sellers out there, but of course there are far more people less willing to buy the products. There are far more people at these Tupperware parties. That is a problem, surely.
Well, the far is the wrong number to use. Not far or less. You do get some pressure on disposable income, but what you get is, well, firstly, we're not just Tupperware. We have 8 direct selling companies, and we're really lucky that part of our business is in the Tupperware business. And by the way, that's products in the kitchen. More people bring their lunch to work during these periods.
And don't go out to restaurants.
And don't go to restaurants. Right. So we're the recipient. On the beauty products, women spend more money on beauty products during economic downturns.
So there's no prioritizing businesses here. You're not putting more into Tupperware, more into the Tupperware parties and selling those boxes than you are to beauty products.
No, we're growing both of them. And what really drives it too, getting back to your other question, by the way, our cap spending is only down about 1/3. So we're staying to 2/3 of what it was.
Which is what? 1/3, it's down 1/3 to what? The cap
probably this next year cap spending somewhere in the $60 million range. But I mean, our value chain, we throw off a lot of cash, and we're not capital intensive. Let me mention, though, your point is people will recruit more people. You may have less disposable income and less people at parties, but when you have a larger sales force and you don't have a fixed expense for that larger sales force, you can still grow. So if there is a counter-cyclical business or channel of distribution for this kind of time, it's us.
$40 billion share buyback plan for this year. Is that right? Does that mean you're not going to be raising the dividend this year?
Well, the focus right now, raising the dividend kind of cuts your flexibility right now.
So you're ruling that out?
Yeah. Well, not ruling it out, but we would be more likely when we bring this up with the board to really do something with share repurchase. We have a lot of cash. We brought our debt level way down. And I think the one thing we all agree on right now is nobody knows what's ahead in the next 3 quarters of this year.
Although it seems you have a lot more visibility than some.
Yeah, what we've got is more visibility because we've got more levers at our disposal right now.
Full year numbers out next week. Is the Street going to be happy?
Well, as you know, I can't comment other than to say we've had a pattern of if we were going to miss our range out there, we would pre-release, and you've noticed we haven't pre-released.
Okay. Well, that tells us enough, I guess.
Yeah.
Here in Davos, who have you been meeting? Who have you been seeing? What type of productive conversation have you been having?
Well, I've come here wearing 2 hats. First, being chairman and CEO of Tupperware Brands. But the other is I've just stepped down as chairman of Boys and Girls Clubs of America. So part of my issues are social issues, and the other issues are business. A lot of focus on leaders of governments in markets where we do business, from presidents of countries, etc., on both issues. How can business be a responsible actor and help? Everybody's looking for job creation, and we have 2.2 million women. So having really substantive discussions with presidents of countries on what we can do. At the same time, we talk about social issues together. It's not either or. It is and.
And, of course, this is a very social business, the Tupperware business.
It is.
That's what it's built around.
Yes.
Do you leave feeling good, optimistic, positive?
No, I'd say on balance, I leave confused that there wasn't enough discussion here about the future. Too much with regard to the panels were on what happened and how did we get here, and not enough discussion on where do we go from here. So I've been kind of agitating some of those meetings. I'll say, okay, so what? We know this. Where are we going next? Where do we put this next step? So what I am hopeful and optimistic about is there's a more holistic approach that we're all interconnected stakeholders, regardless of what country or passport we carry. We've got to figure this out together. You can't be isolated anymore.
Rick, thanks for coming in this morning.
Good
Rick Goings, Chief Executive of Tupperware. The time right now, just before 8:30. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Axel Threlfall. We start this half hour with the very latest in international news. Our correspondent, Darcy Lampton, standing by in London. Darcy.
Hi, Axel. Our top story this morning. Voting has begun in Iraq's provincial elections. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki voted earlier this morning in a poll seen as a key test of Iraq's ability to run its own affairs. The election pits Maliki against powerful Shiite rivals in the south of the country. And in the north, Arabs who boycotted the last poll are seeking to grab a share of power from Kurdish parties. Voting takes place against a backdrop of reduced violence in most parts of the country, but security is still tight, with polling stations ringed by barbed wire and steel fortifications. Polling ends this afternoon, but initial results are not expected for about 5 days. Somalia has a new president, moderate Islamist Sheikh Sharif Ahmed, seen here in the beige jacket, won the country's top job on Saturday and vowed to end conflict in the war-torn nation. Ahmed won the election at about 4 a.m. local time after a runoff vote in an all-night parliamentary session. Commentators say his Islamist roots mean he has a real chance of reuniting Somalis after 18 years of war. Ahmed formerly headed the Sharia courts movement, which brought stability to Mogadishu and much of South Somalia for a period in 2006. Further signs of serious weakness in the US economy ensured a miserable month on Wall Street ended in a rout. US stocks posted their worst January ever, with the Dow Jones down nearly 9% in the period. The S&P 500 fell 8.6% in a month. It often is a harbinger for the rest of the year's performance. The poor Friday finish followed news that the US economy shrank at its fastest pace in nearly 27 years in the fourth quarter. Gold jumped more than 2%, extending recent gains as investors sought refuge in the precious metal. The turmoil also prompted increased buying of longer-term dated US and Eurozone government bonds. Finally to Australia now, where a heatwave has claimed an estimated 20 lives in the south of the country. Temperatures have been hovering above 40 degrees or about 104 Fahrenheit. The dry weather has also helped fan bushfires, destroying at least 15 properties and about 6,000 hectares of land in Victoria State. Police say some of the fires may have been started deliberately. In Adelaide, dozens of elderly people have been admitted to hospital with heat-related ailments, but weather forecasters say there may be some respite ahead. Temperatures are now dipping below 40 in some areas. Well, that's all from London. Now back to you, Axel.
All right, Darcy, many thanks. So we've heard from some of the top delegates here in Davos, but the media also play an important role as they dissect the sessions and debates happening here this week. Let's get their view on the annual meeting. Steve Clark joins us now on a pretty cold-looking balcony out there, Steve.
Yeah, that's right, it is, Axel. The party's over, the limos are leaving, the big names are going, and the skiers are taking over again, and what better day for them to take over, because the weather's absolutely fantastic for skiing. But let's get a bit of analysis of the week now with our media panel here. Let me introduce David Schlesinger, Editor-in-Chief of Reuters, and Nick Deargan, Deputy Managing Editor of the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to start with you, David. I know you've been going to the sessions, the parties, you've been around the place. How do you find the mood here this year?
Well, much more realistic than last year. I think last year people were talking about how the economy was going down, but it would be just a small slowdown, and they really were talking through it. This year people are really confronting it. I have noticed a difference between inside and outside, though. In the public sessions, people are really looking beyond the crisis. In the private sessions, people are still wondering how to actually deal with the crisis.
Okay, Nick, what's your take on it? Has the mood been somber? Is this a sort of group counselling session that's been taking place?
There's a lot of group therapy going on. I kind of wonder if it's almost like Davos being a lagging indicator, because last year was all about sovereign wealth funds and global warming, and this year it's all about the financial crisis, and you can't even get into most of the sessions of the financial crisis. But I went to a session with the Pakistani Prime Minister and the Afghanistan Defense Minister, and this is the tinderbox of the world potentially, and it was half empty. And so this makes me wonder what we're going to be talking about next year somewhat. It'll probably be all the stuff which was more deserted this year.
We've got two Americans with us as it happens. There's been much commented on that the new administration have not been very present here in Davos. Were you surprised about that, David?
Just look at the date. No, 10 days after coming into office, you can't really expect Obama to send a high-level delegation. I think that would have gone down very, very badly at home, even if it might have been good for Davos and good for the World Economic Forum. I think it would have been a terrible message politically at home.
Nick, I mean, perhaps no surprise there, but it left the stage to, well, what, the Russians and the Chinese, really.
It did, and there's been a good bit of disappointment among top European leaders about the absence of the Americans, because especially at this particular time where there's a lot of talk about creating more international standards and trying to find a way out of this financial crisis, there's a real sense that without the Americans here, it's very difficult to have those discussions in that kind of vacuum.
Now, yes, so Dave, go on.
I was going to say, we're going to have the G20. There will be plenty of opportunities for talking. I think probably a lot of the business leaders wanted to get close to the administration, and for that it was a failure. But
and to get a sense of what they're thinking and how things are going to evolve with, and yet, of course, it is a terrible time for any American politician or American administration official to come here at this time, given what's happening in Washington every day. There's a new headline about the latest in the stimulus bill or the latest in the bank bailout.
You mentioned terrible times, terrible time for bankers too, some would say. Some made it here. Was there a mood of contrition there, do you think, at all?
I mean, there certainly was a lot of public contrition. I think privately people are still very, very concerned about how governments and the financial sector will work together to get through the crisis and get to the other end. I think some of the discussions were really fascinating about that. And then comparing European American banks with banks in the emerging markets, quite a contrast.
Any sense, Nick, of a new financial architecture shaping up, or is it just going to be a field day for regulators at the end of the day as the government moves in?
I think this is the big fear of many of the financial firms, but also a lot of business leaders, that in general there'll be an overreaction to too much regulation. There's also a real concern, and this came up repeatedly especially in the last day or two, about a fear of economic nationalism creeping in, where people will want to protect their own industries, will want to protect their own sectors at the potential expense of other businesses, and the real sense that global trade, and even within countries near each other, that trade and the financing for trade is slowing down.
What about Davos Man, David, as was referred to in the FT this week? Our own columnist Jim Saff talked about the end of the Davos consensus. Any feelings about that? Is the atmosphere changing here towards the WEF itself, if you like?
Well, I think the discussions have been more serious. There's been less glitz, and so Davos Man as the epitome of glitz and money and showing off, that probably is dead, and that's probably good. But Davos Man as someone discussing issues, getting together with peers, trying to find solutions, I would say probably isn't dead.
What about you, Nick? Any feeling a change in mood here?
I agree with Dave. I think, look, obviously there's more humility. There's a sense that we don't want to be flashy, but I think financiers in particular have short memories, and if they didn't have short memories, we won't be in this crisis. So yes, there'll be a few years of humility, but I have great faith in the egos of financiers around the world to get back the glitz and glamour.
Just finally, David, any feeling about what Davos next year might be like? Some are talking about maybe more government officials, maybe more contrition, maybe fewer people because they can't afford to come. Will you be here?
Oh, I'm planning to be here because I think it's a great opportunity to meet contacts and to experiment with new forms of journalism, and it serves a variety of good purposes. But as to the topics, I think it's way too early to tell. I think, as we discussed earlier, Davos probably is a bit of a lagging indicator.
Just pressing on those new forms of journalism, because I know you've been Twittering, can we say that, and blogging yourself. Is that stuff kind of coming into play more and more, especially in a very sort of intensive media event like this?
Well, I like to use Davos as an opportunity to experiment because it is a bit of a hothouse of journalists, hothouse of our own people, and hothouse of people you can write about. So I think it's a good place to experiment. But I think we in our profession have to change as quickly as financiers have to change.
Final word to you, Nick. Are you experimenting at the Wall Street Journal? Anything different to the way you're writing? The typewriter's out the window now?
Yeah, the typewriters have been out the window quite a while, thank you. But yes, of course, for us as well, it's been, we're doing a lot of video, we're doing a lot of blogs. Our Davos dispatches on the blog have been quite popular, and it's interesting to see even back home. You see this is you see in the U.S. people are really picking up on the Davos coverage, and you can these days you can measure actually what people are reading, and you're seeing a real difference in the types of people we're coordinating with. We're experimenting with outsiders. We're getting more people within the staff to try different things, and it's been a big success.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Nick Diogan and David Schlesinger, thank you very much for joining us today. There we are, that's our media mood in Davos. It's a lovely skiing day. Axel, we'll see you out on the slopes a bit later, but for now, back to you in the studio.
All right, Steve, many thanks for that. And of course, you can get all your news and your top interviews on this show, Davos Today. But that is it from us for today. Many thanks to everyone for watching this year. I'm Axel Threlfall. We hope to see you again next year.